So today I'm going to be talking about my research project, understanding the practices and challenges of networked orchestration. And this is for spring quarter of 2019. And so at a very high level to start, there are many different ways that people work in the world today. Just a few models that we have include individual work, mentorship, hierarchy, which we see in work organizations a lot, and distributed communities, which we often see in things like Wikipedia. And they each have different levels of agency that allow people to make project level or day-to-day decisions, and how individuals within the community interact with each other, or small teams may interact with each other for day-to-day work. But today we're going to talk about a very different model of working. This idea of a networked orchestration model where you have a single community head or a single leader of the community, and you have certain apprentices who are also considered experts that run subgroups underneath the community head. And then within each of these subgroups, each individual person is working either alone or on a team to do their own tasks or their own work, but they have the ability to connect and work with people outside of their own small group. And in fact, they're encouraged to do so. And so we wanted to study this model in the context of a research lab. We'll get to that in a few minutes. But before, we wanted to cover some related work, specifically starting with classroom orchestration, which has been very well studied. In one paper, Pierre Dillenbra details 15 different design characteristics that, if you want to build technology for classroom orchestration, these technologies should embody. And what we found is that these principles are all actually generally useful for understanding our domain, but there are some things that are different. And so specifically, we need mentors to have a level of awareness into the different work practices a student or a team member is doing to be able to diagnose inefficiencies, and also adapt their feedback as necessary. On the student side, students need to have some sort of awareness about the state of their project, and be able to plan for things they need to work on, because in this distributed organization setting, the mentor is not always giving students tasks, actually very rarely so. And students are driving their own work, so they need to be able to figure out what to do next and what things are the riskiest and most important. And finally, they need to be able to figure out who in the community can help them and what outlets are available to get the help they need. So broadening a little bit to talk about classroom awareness, what we find is that many classroom awareness tools emphasize that teachers should be able to identify where students are in their activities, who needs help, and how they can triage based on who might be waiting the longest, for example, or depending on how many people are needing help with the same thing. Further, these technologies should be ones that are not prescriptive. They should be ones that help in decision-making processes, but not be automated or not be prescriptive, because the teacher knows best and what to do. So extending these for network orchestration, what we actually also need is that because mentors need to do this have this awareness of what their students are doing in the community, these tools may also want to help with identifying and diagnosing any efficiencies in work practice, and be able to help the mentor then address based on the data and feedback that these technologies give. For students, it'd be helpful if these technologies help them gain an awareness of what things they might need to get help on, and how they could get help from the community. Finally, there's this idea of shared orchestration. This model is very different to the two models we talked previously, which are very teacher-centric and focus on the idea that a teacher is still the person who's primarily leading activities that happen in the classroom, with different technologies and different things augmenting their ability to do that. In shared orchestration, the idea is that the teachers and students both share responsibility for orchestrating. So what happens is a teacher may initiate an open-ended activity that the students then continue later on outside the classroom, and they can bring in their findings and discuss. This is very similar to the idea that you have limited time with a mentor and the students go off and work on their own projects. But one big core difference is that in our setting, you have this ability to work across this network of people, and you're very much encouraged to do so. And so what we want to explore and extend with our theory is how that changes the ways that a mentor might help mentor a student or encourage the teaching of different skills that you need to be effective in this community where you can actually go and get help from many, many other people. And so these inform a set of research questions that we want to explore. So first, how do mentors and students engage with the different processes and tools in a network community to perform network orchestration? What breakdowns and challenges arise from their day-to-day work? And how might we build technologies that help aid mentors and students in conducting network orchestration better? And so the methods for our study, we studied one instance of an Agile research studio, which I'll talk about in a minute, at Northwestern University. We did an interview study with faculty mentors, PhD student mentors, and students in DTR. We did it through 2 rounds of interviews, the first focusing on what positive and negative cases of mentoring mentors face, and then the second understanding how struggles arise and things like that. We also did field observation at special interest group meetings. These are meetings that the mentor works with the students to figure out plans and give research feedback. For data collection, we did interviews, transcripts from audio recordings, and we generated field notes. And so just to talk about ARS very briefly, here's a model of the different things that are happening. So we talked a little bit about getting feedback or observing during SIG time, but the things that we wanted to learn through our interviews were all the things that happen outside. So for example, was a student working toward a certain goal before SIG or before studio? How did that pan out? What things worked, what things didn't, and why those happened? And at SIG meeting, we want to understand mostly how the mentor is using the SIG time and how they adapt SIG time to whatever they might need to use that week. For analysis, we took a thematic analysis approach. So the process was roughly we took the interview transcripts and open coded for themes. We then collated the themes into some emerging themes for the first round of interviews. Our second round interview protocol was then informed by these emerging themes. We then, after running the second round of interviews, coded and collated themes for the round 2, and finally we took all the themes together to generate our findings. So for part 1 of findings, I'd like to talk about the practices in network orchestration that we observed. And so high level, what we found is that network orchestration involves far greater coordination between people in distributed settings that other orchestration settings that have been studied or work organizations haven't explored much. And it requires that mentors actually teach students more than just the research skills or the work skills. They actually need to teach students how to self-direct and to figure out what things they need to work on next, and also the help-seeking skills for the community to run effectively. And the 2 core points that we find here are that students have to use the entire community to fulfill needs with their research projects, and both the mentors and students share some responsibility in doing this orchestration. Going deeper into the first one, using the entire community to fulfill needs, what we found is that having various outlets for feedback allows students to enact many different strategies to get their day-to-day work done. So as one example, one student talked about how they used office hours to help plan a status update, which they would talk about their entire project and get feedback from the entire community. And then later use Slack to get feedback on a specific plan that they were going to use from their SIG head and their SIG members. Another key point is that mentors encourage students to find resources that help with tasks but are less restrictive. So for example, if a task is something that a mentor or a SIG head could help with, but there is someone else in the community who's also helpful at that isn't as restricted on time, the student should go and seek help from them, since faculty mentor and SIG head resources are very limited. Additionally, students help scaffold each other in finding help throughout the community. So when new students come into the community and don't really know who to reach out to, they can ask senior students, and they do ask senior students who they can get help with, for example, for qualitative coding. But then as the students stay in the community, they actually end up building models of who can help with specific tasks and who might be working on what at any given time. So they know that, this person is good to ask right now for, say, design arguments or site design. And finally, for sharing the orchestration responsibility, what we found is that mentors help students learn and help orchestrate the student learning and work process at scheduled meetings, where they'll help students learn to plan better, help seek, and generally improve their work process skills so they're effective in the community. They also help students think about the best ways to use resources. So for example, helping students get better at the self-direction skills, but then also to help sustain the community's limited resources. While doing this, the entire time students are actually working on their own outside of these meetings. And so in those settings, outside of the meetings, the student is doing all the orchestration. So here, the mentor is acting as a guide to help improve processes, and also give feedback when necessary, but not explicitly telling the students what to do for every step. Now, shifting our attention to tensions, we found is that network orchestration generally requires mentors and students to have some awareness about the things that are happening in the community. But this becomes challenging when you have 20 to 30 people in a community. Specifically, we find that mentors struggle to track project status and learning goals for each student, while students, they also have trouble identifying when help-seeking practices and self-directed practices may not be effective, since generally what students do outside of meetings is quite opaque to what the mentors see. And finally, students struggle to find resources that actually use the entire community. So starting with project status and learning goals, one thing that's challenging is that it's very cognitively burdensome to just track everything that's going on for your students. And what that results in is that at a SIG meetings, mentors have to spend a lot more time actually trying to recap what's happening and diagnosing issues, which means that they may have less time to spend on actually improving practices that the student is doing. Additionally, mentors want to understand the community level impact of certain practices that they're doing, but they don't really have a way to know how the community as a whole is functioning and whether or not their practices are effective. And that makes it challenging to make sure that these network communities actually do have long-term sustainability. Regarding opaqueness, mentors generally don't know what students do outside of their meetings until they meet again the following week. And so it's difficult to know if the students are working effectively or doing the things that they plan to do and things like that. And because of that, in the short amount of time they have students to help with challenges, it can result in students not getting the help that they need with all the skills. So mentors may miss other skills or needs that students have that they didn't have time to talk about. And finally, because mentors don't necessarily know what skills have or haven't been worked on, they can't easily assess that there are gaps that are forming. And failing to practice these skills can make students revert back to old ineffective practices that then affect their ability to self-direct and conduct research effectively in this networked orchestration setting. Finally, on the student side, we talked earlier about how students tend to build up models about who can help with what. But one thing that becomes difficult is that because there's so many people, and students aren't in contact with all the people in the community at any given time, it makes it difficult to know everyone and what all their skill sets are. And so what ends up happening is students find that they have small cliques of people who they know really well, but they don't reach out to a much broader community. And so as a consequence, the students don't necessarily use the entire community for help seeking. And it's particularly a struggle for new students who are just entering community and don't really know what others can do. And what this means is that another potential problem is that when there might be a lot of help requests for a certain asset, for example, for iOS debugging, a certain student could become very overburdened because that's a student that is most salient to everyone else in the community. And so what does it actually mean for technologies that we want to build? Well, roughly there's two different types of technology we want to consider. So the first is around supporting awareness in network communities. We talked earlier about how classroom awareness tools generally focus on wanting to promote this awareness about what people are doing in the classroom to the teacher. But one thing that we need to do is to extend this a lot further in helping the mentors track what's going on and also help aid in their diagnosis process, not just determining who needs help. And for students, it's also about helping identify resources and how their community can help fulfill various needs. Another area of work that would be worth considering is tools for aiding in reflection. And so instead of having to have mentors continually try to diagnose and do all the work of identifying when they're ineffective practices, we could imagine some tools that actually help students identify their own practices and then be able to share them with the mentors, so the mentors have to spend less time doing the diagnosis and can spend more time actually just helping students work through their inefficiencies. So at a high level takeaway, what we found are in the ways we do networked orchestration, students use the entire community to fulfill needs on their research projects, and then mentors and students share orchestration responsibilities, where mentors typically help orchestrate in meetings and students self-direct their work outside of meetings. For challenges in conducting network orchestration, we find that mentors struggle to track project and learning goals for each student, which makes it challenging for them to have to go and diagnose all the issues, which is also related to the opaqueness in how students work outside of meetings. And students also struggle to find resources when across the full community when they're not well connected to everyone there. For design implications, what we consider are potentially building technologies that better support awareness of student status to mentors for diagnosis and understanding of expertise and availability for help in the community for students. And a second area of future work might consider better tools for reflection for students to identify their own inefficient work practices.